You ever wake up and feel like the whole world is giving you that look? That quiet little smirk people wear when they know something you don't. Oh, they're polite about it, of course. Humans are such elegant liars. They pat your back, they nod. They say good morning, but their eyes sparkle like they've already seen the punchline, and you're the last one still waiting for the joke to land. Everyone knows they changed last night except you. Isn't that a delightful kind of madness? Watching people walk around with that secret confidence, that new skin they slipped into overnight, while you're still dragging around yesterday's version of yourself like an old coat you forgot to throw away. You know what's funny about people changing? They do it the way thieves work, quiet, quick, and always when you're not looking. They slip into a new version of themselves so gently that by the time you blink, the person you thought you knew has already packed their bags and moved on from who they used to be. And the best part, they expect you to keep treating them like the old version, the outdated model, the one they abandoned like an empty wrapper on the floor. People evolve quietly while you cling to old versions of them, like you're the caretaker of ghosts no one else sees anymore. You hold on to memories, moments, expressions, thinking they still fit, while they've already peeled those skins off and tossed them into the dark corners of last night. It's almost laughable how we trust what we remember more than what's right in front of us. Someone stands there with a new spark in their eyes, a sharper tone in their voice, a different kind of confidence dripping off their shoulders, and you still talk to them like they're soft, familiar, predictable. You keep thinking you know them. You keep assuming nothing has changed. Meanwhile, they're watching you, amused, wondering how long it'll take before you realize that the person you're speaking to isn't the same one you're picturing in your head. They changed while you slept. They shifted while you were busy repeating your routines. They rewrote themselves while you were clinging to yesterday's script. And maybe that's the trick life loves to play, showing you how fast someone can outgrow the version of them you swear is still real. It's unsettling, isn't it? How someone can laugh differently, stand differently, breathe differently, and you can't quite pinpoint when it happened. They're not trying to hide it, but they're not going to explain it either. Because explanations are for people who want to be understood, and they've reached a point where they don't need you to understand. They just need to move, to stretch, to become whatever last night forced them to become. And while they're busy stepping into their new skin, you're busy polishing the old one, thinking you're doing something noble. You cling to their past because it's comfortable, because it makes everything feel safe, controlled, predictable. But comfort is a slow kind of blindness. It makes you miss the subtle tilts, the small shifts, the quiet storms. You think you're paying attention, but you're really holding on to a memory disguised as a person. You're talking to a shadow, while the real figure has already changed shapes behind your back. People don't announce their evolution. They don't send you a warning or a polite little message saying, by the way, I won't be who I was tomorrow. No, they disappear into themselves for a night, confront something only they could see, break through some internal wall, and come out different. And you, still attached to the outdated blueprint, walk in the next day, expecting everything to match what's in your head. But nothing matches anymore. Their voice carries a new weight. Their eyes hold a new decision. Their presence feels like a room rearranged in the dark. You recognize the pieces, but the layout is a stranger. It almost feels like betrayal, doesn't it? Not because they changed, because they didn't wait for you, because they left you in the dust of who they used to be while they climbed into someone new. But why would they wait? Growth isn't a group project. People don't pause their evolution because you're comfortable. They don't slow down because you prefer the old version. They grow in silence and solitude, in those late night moments when the world stops pretending. And if you don't keep up, if you don't open your eyes wide enough to see the shift, then you're left holding on to fragments while they walk around fully rebuilt. And maybe that's the unsettling truth you avoid. You don't cling to the old versions of people because they need you to. You cling because you're afraid of facing the fact that you haven't changed with them. It's easier to believe they stayed the same than to admit you stood still. It's easier to hold on to their past than confront your own reluctance to step into a new one. Because if they can evolve overnight, what does that say about you still living the same day over and over? You know that strange little sting you feel when someone walks into the room and you can tell without a word, without a gesture, that something about them is different. That itch under your skin that whispers, something happened while you weren't watching. That's the beauty of last night's turning point. It wasn't yours, but theirs. While you were tangled in your thoughts, replaying the same old loops, someone else was out there wrestling with a moment big enough to rearrange their whole insides. You didn't see it. You didn't hear it, but you can feel the aftermath like a crack in the air. People don't always change in daylight. They change in the hours when everything is quiet, when the world stops pretending to be busy. Something hits them, an argument, a realization, a truth they can't unhear, a wound that finally spills over, and suddenly the person you knew is gone, not dead, not lost, just replaced with a version forged in a moment you weren't part of. And that's what makes it sting, isn't it? You weren't invited to their transformation. You were a spectator without even knowing the show had started. Imagine them last night, sitting alone with a truth that finally demanded to be faced. Maybe they cracked open under the weight of something they'd been avoiding. Maybe they snapped out of a delusion that kept them soft. Maybe they let go of someone or something, or even a piece of themselves they'd been gripping too tightly. Whatever it was big enough to shift the entire foundation they stand on. And you, unaware, walked into today like nothing changed. But they changed everything. You see it in the way they hold themselves, a little more firm, a little less breakable. You see it in their eyes, not colder but clearer, like they finally wiped the fog off the glass and decided they weren't playing along with the same old script anymore. They don't speak like yesterday's version. They don't laugh with the same softness. Something sharpened inside them, and you're standing there still trying to read them with yesterday's dictionary. And isn't it fascinating how quickly we fall behind? One night, that's all it takes. One night for someone to face something monumental, to rewrite the story inside their skull, to take the pieces of themselves and rearrange them in a way you didn't expect. You think people change slowly, gradually, gently. But real change, the kind that cuts deep, usually happens like a snap. One breath in, one truth confronted, one decision made, and suddenly, there's no going back. They cross their own invisible line, and you don't even know the line existed. The world tells you change is some long, poetic process. But real change is messy, sudden, violent in the quietest way. Last night, something inside them reached its limit. A boundary finally drew itself. A weakness finally got exposed. A strength finally woke up. And that awakening didn't wait for your permission or your comfort. It happened in a moment that belonged to them and them alone. And what does that leave you with? A strange sense of distance. Like you're standing in front of the same face, but the soul behind it walked somewhere you didn't follow. They're answering questions before you finish them. They're seeing through your old assumption. They're not reacting the way they always did. You're confused, but they aren't. They understand exactly what shifted. They lived it. You just arrived late. Maybe the real discomfort isn't that they changed. It's that their change exposes your stillness. Their sudden transformation highlights how long you've been waiting for something to push you, shake you, crack you open. They had their turning point last night. You're still looking for yours. They crossed the threshold. You're still at the doorway, pretending the world hasn't tilted, and you can sense it now, that deep, unsettling truth creeping up the back of your mind. You aren't out of place because they changed. You're out of place because you didn't. You ever notice how the loudest changes in a person make absolutely no sound at all? The world loves to pretend that transformation is dramatic, filled with big speeches, big gestures, fireworks in the sky. But the real shifts, the ones that actually matter, they happen in silence long before anyone else realizes what's going on. You look at someone and think you're seeing today's version of them, but what you're really seeing is the echo of choices they made in the quiet hours when no one was watching. Change sneaks in like a shadow, settles into their bones, and waits patiently for the right moment to reveal itself. People don't transform because someone clapped for them or begged them to improve. They transform because of private wars you weren't invited to. While you were busy assuming everything was the same, they were sitting alone staring at a truth that finally demanded its payment. Maybe it was a memory that hit a little too hard. Maybe it was a realization that stripped them bare. Maybe it was a disappointment so heavy it forced them to rearrange every part of their thinking just to breathe. Whatever it was, it didn't need an audience. It didn't need applause. It just needed silence. You think you know a person because you've seen them laugh, seen them talk, seen them move, but you haven't seen the thoughts they choke back at midnight. You haven't seen the battles they fight behind their eyes. Those are the places where change starts, in the moments when the world is asleep, and they're being dragged face to face with whatever truth they've been avoiding. And when the mind finally gets tired of running, it rewires itself without warning. No noise, no announcement, just a quiet click inside their soul. And you miss it because humans love obvious signs. You want tears, shouting, break down, something dramatic enough to reassure you that something significant happened. But people aren't built like that. Most folks learn to break quietly. They learn to rebuild quietly. They learn to shift direction without telling a single soul because they're tired of explaining themselves to people who only hear what they want to hear. So you stand there confused, wondering when they changed, how they changed, why they changed. The truth is, they changed long before you noticed. You just weren't paying attention to the silence. And silence is dangerous. It hides more than noise ever could. Silence is where decisions are made without hesitation, where boundaries are drawn without negotiation, where people finally admit to themselves what they've been pretending not to feel. And once someone has that private conversation with their own soul, there's no going back. They don't need to announce it. They don't need to warn you. They simply walk into the next day carrying a new version of themselves that doesn't fit into your old expectation. You keep trying to talk to them like they're still who they were, and something feels off. They don't respond the same. They don't soften the same. They don't bend the same way they used to. And you wonder why. You think they're acting strange. You think they're distant. But what you're really seeing is the aftershock of a silent earthquake that reshaped their entire foundation while you slept through it like it was nothing. Silent change is the most powerful kind because it doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait until you're comfortable. It doesn't check if you're ready to deal with the new version of someone. It just happens. And when they step into the morning with a different energy, a different strength, a different clarity, you're left trying to understand the shift with yesterday's logic. But yesterday's logic doesn't work anymore because yesterday's version of them no longer exists. And maybe that's why it unsettles you so much. Silent change reminds you how fragile your assumptions are. How easily the people around you can evolve without your input. How little control you actually have over who stays the same and who decides to grow. You expect the world to give you signs, warnings, clues. But life doesn't communicate in neon lights. It whispers, it nudges. It rearranges people quietly in the dark, then lets you deal with the shock in the daylight. And deep down, you know what the silence means. If someone can change so deeply without saying a word, then maybe you can too. You've been waiting for something loud, some big moment, some dramatic push to force you into becoming who you need to be. But every powerful transformation starts the same way theirs did, quietly. Did ever watch someone evolve right in front of you, not because they want to impress you, not because life gave them some grand invitation, but simply because staying the same finally became too painful for them. That's the real punchline in all of this. Others grow faster when you stay comfortable, while you hold on to your familiar little routines like their security blankets. They're out there tearing holes in their old selves just to breathe a little freer. It's almost poetic how your comfort becomes their motivation. How your stillness becomes their reason to move. People don't always grow because it's inspiring. Most of the time they grow because standing still feels like drowning. Last night, while you sat wrapped up in the safety of what you already knew, someone else hit that point where enough was enough. They got sick of the patterns, the excuses, the softness that kept them stuck. They felt that burning in their chest that whispers, "You can't keep living like this." And instead of pushing it away, instead of burying it under distractions, they faced it head on. They did the thing you avoid. They stepped into discomfort. They let it cut them. They let it shape them. They let it change them. And now you look at them today and wonder why they seem different. Why their shoulders sit a little higher, why their voice isn't as shaky, why their eyes don't beg for approval the way they used to. It wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. It was the simple truth that while you were keeping yourself warm inside your bubble, they were out. They're walking barefoot across the shards of their own mistakes until they grew numb to the pain. People like that don't stay soft forever. They harden in all the right places. They sharpen in all the ways you didn't expect. Comfort is a trap, dressed like a gift. It makes you believe you're safe, when really you're just stagnant. You keep repeating the same habits, same thoughts, same reactions, because it feels familiar. But familiar doesn't mean right. Familiar doesn't mean growth. It just means you're scared to let your world get shaken. Meanwhile, the people around you aren't scared anymore. They hit their breaking point and decided they weren't going to live inside the same shell for another day. They chose the discomfort you avoid, and that discomfort rewarded them with strength. You ever notice how the people who grow the fastest are the ones who've gone through the most? Not because life favors them, but because they stopped waiting for life to be gentle. They let the world bruise them a little. They let truth sting. They let failure slap them awake. While you were protecting your ego, they were destroying theirs so they could rebuild something real. And now they're miles ahead, not because they're better, but because they were willing to feel what you keep running from. And the wild part, their growth puts a spotlight on your avoidance. Suddenly you see the contrast, their clarity against your confusion, their courage against your hesitation, their movement against your stillness. It's uncomfortable, isn't it? To look at someone who changed in the time it took you to hold on to your excuses. You want to believe they had it easier, that they got lucky, that life opened a door for them. But deep down, you know they opened that door themselves while you stood staring at yours, waiting for a sign. Growth isn't polite. It doesn't tap you on the shoulder and ask if you're ready. It's messy, painful, raw. It demands sacrifice. It demands honesty. It demands that you step out of the cozy little story you keep telling yourself. But you can't move if you're too busy convincing yourself that comfort is the same thing as peace. Peace comes after the chaos, not before it. Comfort just delays the chaos until it finally explodes in your face. Meanwhile, the person who changed last night, they embraced their chaos. They let it break them enough to rebuild. They walked through the fire you're still scared to touch. And because of that, they walked out different, faster, sharper, lighter. You're not slower because anything is wrong with you. You're slower because you haven't suffered enough to want to move. They grew because staying the same hurt more than changing. You stay the same because the pain hasn't caught up to you yet. You ever talk to someone and feel like you're having two different conversations at the same time, one with the person standing in front of you, and one with the version of them that only exists in your memory. That's what happens when you're the only one still treating today like yesterday. Everyone else wakes up, shifts, adjusts, rearranges themselves, and you keep insisting the world hasn't changed at all. It's almost comical, really, how the mind clings to its old files even after the system has updated. You walk around assuming people should act the way they used to, think the way they used to, feel the way they used to, completely unaware that you're speaking to someone who outgrew those patterns while you were still romanticizing them. People don't stay trapped inside the versions you keep locked in your head. They shed them, quietly, efficiently, sometimes violently. One night, one decision, one moment of honesty with themselves is all it takes for them to step out of the skin you're still trying to fit them into, but you insist on reading them through yesterday's lens like you're flipping through an old photo album and pretending the pictures are still alive. You meet them with old expectations, old assumptions, old interpretations, and then you wonder why nothing makes sense anymore. The truth is, you're not talking to who they are, you're talking to who they were, and that version doesn't even live there anymore. It's wild how stubborn the human mind can be. You notice the slight changes, the way they pause differently, the way they no longer entertain certain conversations, the way their tone carries a new firmness, but you brush it off, convincing yourself everything is normal, because accepting that someone has changed forces you to admit something even more uncomfortable, that you haven't, that you're still walking around with yesterday's mindset while the people around you are already building their tomorrow. You treat today like a rerun, expecting the scenes to play out exactly as they always have, while everyone else is already improvising new lines. And that's why you feel out of sync. That's why you feel like you're walking into a room where everyone already knows something you don't. You're operating on old software, trying to run new reality. You respond to their old insecurities, not realizing they don't need that comfort anymore. You adjust your tone to their old fragility, not realizing they've grown tougher overnight. You try to soothe wounds they've already healed, try to avoid triggers they've already outgrown, try to solve problems they've already learned to handle without you. In your mind, they're still the same. In their world, they're anything but. And maybe the most ironic part is how offended you get when they don't fit the mold you keep pushing onto them. You call them distant, cold, changed, unpredictable, but really, they're just updated. They're operating from a place where yesterday's rules don't apply. They learned something last night, saw something, felt something, confronted something, and it shifted them. While you were sleeping, they were waking up. While you were replaying old stories, they were tearing out entire chapters. And people who change like that fast, decisively, quietly, they don't explain themselves. They don't sit down to give you a detailed report on why they're not the same anymore. They simply stop entertaining what no longer aligns with who they're becoming. They stop shrinking. They stop waiting. They stop repeating the cycles you're still comfortable with. And without noticing, you start becoming the only one stuck in yesterday. The only one using outdated scripts. The only one trying to drag people back into versions of themselves they already buried. It's unsettling, isn't it? To realize you might be the last one to catch up. To realize that the people you thought you knew have been shedding layers while you're still admiring the old ones. To realize that you're not being left out because they changed, but because you didn't. You keep expecting the world to stay still so you don't have to move. But the world doesn't freeze just because you're scared of motion. People don't pause their evolution to match your pace. They shift, they stretch, they rise, and if you don't rise too, you end up watching everyone from a distance, confused about why you can't recognize them anymore. But maybe the real joke is this: you keep treating today like yesterday because it's easier than admitting today demands something new from you. Something braver, something sharper, something uncomfortable. Yesterday lets you stay small. Today doesn't. You ever look at someone and feel like they're holding up a mirror you didn't ask to see? Not a gentle, flattering mirror, the kind that exposes every hesitation you thought you'd hidden. That's what happens when their transformation outpaces yours. Their new strength doesn't just shine, it exposes every crack you've been trying to paint over. Their transformation exposes your hesitation. You see them standing taller, speaking clearer, moving with a conviction they didn't have before. And suddenly, all the excuses you've been feeding yourself start to sound ridiculous even to you. People changing isn't the uncomfortable part. The uncomfortable part is what their change reveals about you. They grow, and suddenly you realize how long you've been stalling. They take risks, and you become painfully aware of how tightly you cling to your comfort. They stop tolerating things they once let slide, and you're forced to see how often you've tolerated things that slowly drained you. Their evolution shines a spotlight on your stagnation, and that spotlight burns. It burns because you can't blame anyone else. When the evidence is right there in front of you, you didn't move. And maybe that's what irritates you the most. Not that they shifted, but that they did it without waiting for your permission, without checking whether you were ready to handle the upgraded version of them. They didn't hold themselves back so you could feel comfortable. They didn't shrink to match your pace. They didn't freeze themselves just because you were scared of your next step. They grew anyway, and their growth forces you to confront the truth. There was never anything stopping you from evolving except the story you kept repeating in your head. You watch them now, and everything about them feels unfamiliar. Not in a bad way, but in a way that makes your stomach twist. Their presence carries a new weight, a new awareness, a new sense of self-respect. They speak differently, not aggressively, just honestly. They don't tiptoe around people's feelings the way they used to. They don't apologize for breathing. They don't second-guess every word they say. And while a part of you might admire it, another part feels exposed, almost threatened, because their confidence highlights your doubts. Their clarity contrasts your confusion. Their courage makes your fear look louder than ever. You're not threatened by them. You're threatened by what they reveal about you. Their improvement puts pressure on the parts of you that have been collecting dust. You start noticing how often you downplay your own ideas, how many times you bite your tongue when you want to speak, how easily you settle for half efforts, half decisions, half versions of yourself. And each time you notice it, a voice in your head whispers, "They stopped doing that. Why haven't you?" Humans hate being shown their own weaknesses, especially by accident. You want to believe they've changed too fast or too much or suddenly, but deep down you know they just changed first. They got tired of their own patterns before you got tired of yours. They stopped being afraid before you chose to. They hit their breaking point while you kept cushioning yours. And now every bit of strength they display feels like proof that you could have grown too if you weren't so skilled at hesitation. And hesitation is such a clever little liar. It whispers, "Now's not the right time." It says, "You're not ready yet." It becomes your shield, your excuse, your comfort blanket. But once you see someone else push past theirs, your own hesitation suddenly looks flimsy, transparent, foolish. It loses its power. It loses its logic. It becomes exactly what it always was, a delay, nothing more. That's why their growth unsettles you. It breaks the illusion that you've been hiding behind, the illusion that you'll change one day, that you'll become confident, eventually that you'll take the leap when everything lines up. But you know now, because of them, that one day is just hesitation wearing perfume. Eventually is fear wearing makeup. And when everything lines up is simply your way of saying you're scared to jump. Their transformation shows you what it looks like when someone stops negotiating with their limitation. And once you've seen that, once you've witnessed that shift in someone who was once just like you can't pretend you don't know what's possible anymore. Their evolution exposes your hesitation, not to embarrass you, but to hold up a brutally honest truth. You only stay the same because you choose to. You start to notice it first in the way they talk, not the words, they've used those before, but the tone, the rhythm, the strange new steadiness that wasn't there last night. It's like someone tightened the strings inside them, tuned them, sharpened them. They speak with this uncomfortable confidence, the kind that doesn't ask for your approval or check whether you're keeping up. And it's funny, isn't it, how such a small shift in someone else's voice can make your whole world tilt a little. Because deep down, you remember how their voice used to waver, how they used to look to you for reassurance, how they once bent themselves into shapes just to feel accepted. But not anymore. Something in them changed, and now every syllable they drop feels like a reminder that you didn't. Then you see it in their posture. People underestimate posture, but it gives everything away. They stand like they're finally taking up the space they withheld from themselves for years. Shoulders back, chin steady, eyes not darting around to make sure everyone's comfortable. They move with this strange ease, like they've stopped dragging the invisible chains they used to carry everywhere. And when you watch them walk into a room now, you realize it. They're not waiting for permission to exist. They're not asking the world to let them breathe. They're not shrinking to make anyone feel taller. And that quiet boldness of theirs creates a kind of pressure in the air that you can feel right against your ribs. Their conversations change too. They don't waste time on the same old trivialities, the safe, predictable cliches people use to avoid truth. They talk about real things now. Their pain, their growth, their mistakes, their boundaries, their wants. And the worst part is they speak about all of it without flinching. You remember when they used to hide their feelings like fragile glass, scared someone might drop them. You remember when they used to swallow their pain until it nearly choked them. But now, they drag the truth out into the light without hesitation. And you sit there, listening, realizing that the reason it feels so unsettling is because you're still terrified of your own truth. Their habits shift next. The small ones first. They stop replying to every message instantly. They stop showing up for people who drain them. They stop giving explanations to those who don't deserve them. They stop pretending to be unaffected. They pause before they say yes. They think before they let someone back in. And while it looks like simple behavioral changes on the surface, you can sense the deeper message humming beneath it. They finally chose themselves. Not in a selfish way, but in a way that exposes how rarely you choose yourself. Then comes the part that stings the most, their silence. There's a different texture to it now. It's not the silence of suppression or fear or uncertainty. It's a deliberate quiet, a controlled quiet, the kind that says, I don't need to explain myself anymore. When they go quiet now, it doesn't feel like distance. It feels like dignity. And that forces you to recognize how often your own silence comes from fear, how often your quiet moments are just you avoiding the mirror because you're scared of what you'll see. You notice the way they look at you too, not with hostility or coldness, but with this unsettling clarity. They're not blinded by old memories anymore. They're not softened by familiarity. They see you exactly as you are now, not as you once were. And that makes your skin crawl a little because you realize how much you've relied on people. Seeing an outdated version of you, a version you've outgrown but still hide behind. Their new clarity exposes your old disguises. Even the way they carry their pain has changed. They're not romanticizing it anymore. Not wearing it like some tragic badge of honor. Their wounds aren't excuses now. They're lessons. Their scars aren't stories of suffering. They're maps showing where they refuse to return. And watching them handle their pain with such sharp honesty forces you to admit how often you cling to yours just to justify staying the same. But the final shift, the one that truly shakes you, is this peculiar peace they've developed. Not the soft, delicate peace people pretend to have for show. This is a grounded peace, a scarred peace. A peace born from breaking and rebuilding. It sits in their eyes, in their breath, in the calm steadiness of their presence. And when you stand next to them, that peace becomes a mirror reflecting every storm you've been avoiding. You see how long you've been circling the same problems, how long you've been negotiating with your fears, how long you've been delaying the version of yourself you keep promising will appear someday. Their presence forces you to confront the truth, not because they preach it, not because they demand it, but because their transformation creates a contrast you can't escape. Their new self exposes the pieces of you that haven't moved.